Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sunny90, and today we're going to be reacting to the animated history of Iceland by Subhuin. Or Subhuin, or Subhuin, Subhuin, Subin, Subin, I'm bad at pronunciation. That's just kind of my thing. Go subscribe to them. Go like, subscribe, everything else like that. They deserve all the love, happiness, and everything else in the world. They have an amazing art style. They have an amazing animation team. They put infinitely more effort into things than I ever could, or ever would desire to. It's just not in me to be this good at things. It just isn't. This is why I produce crappy little internet videos instead of actually doing things like this. Now, my understanding of Icelandic history is extremely limited. I know it was originally settled by Celtic missionaries. I don't know if there were people there before them, but there were Celtic missionaries there, which Irish missionaries there from sometime in the 400s. I don't really remember. I don't really know the timeline there. I know that thanks to CK2, Crusader Kings 2, for those of you who don't know, and specifically a mod for Crusader Kings 2, When the World Stopped Making Sense, which is the Fall of Rome mod, which brings the start date farther back. So I know that it was colonized, or at least settled, by the Irish for a little while. Then the Norse came, ended up colonizing it, forcing them all out, or just assimilating them, whatever, and it became back to pagan, because it was originally Christian. I don't know if there are people living there before, but from my limited knowledge, it was Christian, then it went back to pagan, Norse paganism, to be specific, and then it ended up becoming part of, like, the lingua franca of Norse. It ended up becoming part of, like, the de jure Norse area. It ended up becoming, like, a little colony. It ended up becoming an outpost, which led to other explorations up north. I know it ended up becoming part of Norway, because I think it was the Norwegians who ended up settling it. It was Norway, and before Norway ended up getting conquered by other people. And then I know once Scandinavia ended up becoming Christianized, a lot of pagans fled to Iceland, and then once Iceland started getting Christianized, a lot of the pagans fled out, and a lot of them ended up trying to get to Greenland. Greenland is an uninhabitable shithole, so most of them died, and that's also part of what led to the original discovery of the Americas. Well, original, I say original, there are people living there. But then that colony died, so nobody knew. Yeah, so that's about my limited understanding of Icelandic history. That was, yeah. I also know that Norway was conquered multiple times by Denmark, Sweden, pretty much just those two. It's been both those two bitches at one point or another throughout most of its history. I also know that Iceland is very volcanic, and I know that Iceland is the closest to ancient Norse that we have, like, because it's so isolated. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark end up becoming closer related to Germany and Russia in their lingua franca. But, from my understanding, Iceland is pretty isolated, so it maintained a lot older version of Norse than what is currently spoken in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. That's it. That is my understanding of Iceland. That is what I have going into this. Who knows? There might be more things spoken of in here that I'll be able to bounce off of, because I do know a great deal about history, but that is what I can think of off the top of my head. All right, let's jump into it, shall we? Let's see how much I know versus what is actually going to be said.
The Samurai Limited Edition pin is available now. Hurry and order yours now before they run out, or get one for free by signing up at Patreon like all of these nice people.
Sorry about that. Go subscribe to their Patreon. They deserve all the love, happiness, and everything else in the world. They do so much work. They deserve it so much more than everyone else. Look at their animation style. They obviously deserve it. And yeah, I've totally watched them before. I just can't remember what videos or when. I don't think it was ever on the channel, though. And I haven't watched this one.
This episode is supported by CuriosityStream. Sign up today and get access to Nebula, a streaming platform for creators by creators. Iceland is a great example of how history and culture can be preserved. The tiny volcanic island within breathing distance of the Arctic Circle acted as an incubator for cultures that haven't been around for centuries at this point, giving a reflection into pre-Christian Scandinavia. Nation-states as we know them today are influenced by a huge variety of factors, the speed of which can be measured in proximity. Denmark was the center of the Nordic world in the early Middle Ages. Its wet, swampy, and disease-ridden marshes, or mark, was what insulated the Scandinavian peninsula from the rest of Europe, which had allowed the Vikings to originate in the first place. In fact, this barrier, as well as the volatile and stormy North Sea, was so difficult to navigate that the Scandinavians were a footnote to early European cultures like the Romans. Only northern barbarian raiders were talked about at any significant length. Gotta hand it to the Romans, they didn't discriminate because everyone was a barbarian. It would take centuries of technology to bring Scandinavia into the Christian fold.
That's the same with Greeks when they were writing about it, the Parthians when they were writing about it, pretty much everyone when they were writing about it. The ancient Chinese had the same thing where they basically just called everybody like Mongoloid, where it's just like, oh, they're all this, like they're all the same thing. And they didn't really differentiate. They tried to, and the Romans made notes of like the different ways they were dressed and things like that, like how some different barbarian tribes were tall and blonde, others were shorter and redhead and things like that. So they made notes of it. It's the same with the ancient Chinese, but pretty much everyone to any settled empire, anyone who wasn't them and was really just considered barbaric.
Better roads, stronger horses, and ships that wouldn't capsize Scandinavia into the Christian significant length.
Sorry, I had to go back.
Gotta hand it to the Romans, they didn't discriminate because everyone was a barbarian. It would take centuries of technology to bring Scandinavia into the Christian fold. Better roads, stronger horses, and ships that wouldn't capsize when you put them in the bathtub. And thus Scandinavia was Christianized. And if the Europeans had simultaneously gotten their hands on the spectacularly wealthy Viking trade routes at the same time, well, that was just an added bonus, right? Iceland, on the other hand, was incubated not by a mark, but by the gargantuan North Atlantic Ocean. The further north you go, the worse the storms get. Besides, Iceland was out of the way and didn't offer much in the way of valuable trade to even bother with. So a few more centuries in the technology oven, Iceland would have to wait its turn. But in the meantime, we got to see what these northern
snow for sale.
Barbarians would do, isolated so far from the rest of the world.
I hope he talks a little bit about the Irish, about the Celts that were there, because I know very little about them. Granted, I don't know if there's much to know about them, but we'll see. If he doesn't speak of it, then after this video, I'll look it up and go over it with you, see what we can learn together, because that fascinates me.
During the Viking Age, also called the early Middle Ages before it was cool, the Scandinavians ruled the trade on the northern part of the European continent. The trade was financed by raiding, or Viking. It wasn't long before these raids ventured outside of Scandinavia into pre-existing, yes, let me say that again, pre-existing trade routes, bringing back valuable wealth to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, because nothing sells quite like stolen Christian treasure. Eventually, the Vikings themselves were forging new trade routes in faraway unknown lands, exploring beyond their icy Scandinavian fortress. And the direction of this exploration was often determined by which way the prospective nations were facing. The Swedes went north to Lapland and east to what is now Russia. The Danes went to the British Isles and mainland Western Europe. But as far as the Norwegians, heck, all they had was a whole lot of ocean near where they were. There must be at least something out there. Hey look, some islands. And there was, the Faroe Islands. Barren for most of its history, was discovered en route between Norway and Ireland. Settled by the Vikings and used as a trade post for further Viking raids, along with Orkney and Shetland, the Faroe Islands became an important link to great wealth over the sea. Just try not to get lost getting there. One fine day, a Viking got lost getting there and found himself sighting an island he was certain he'd never seen before. "There must be humans there," he exclaimed. "Look at all the smoke from the campfires." Not realizing that volcanoes are more than capable of producing smoke without human habitation. Iceland is the land of fire and ice, literally, originating as a series of volcanoes in a fault line exploding its way out of the Norwegian Sea and cleaving itself into its ragged and barren landscape. There is some evidence that the Norse were in fact not the first settlers of the island, who may have been Gaelic monks from Ireland.
Yeah.
But they didn't stay, presumably because it's bloody freezing.
Oh, I thought they were forced off by the Norwegians. Granted, I know very little about this.
But as for the Norwegians, who were all too familiar with living in a frozen wasteland, to them it was absolute paradise. This place is beautiful, isn't it? I shall call it Snowland. Alright, let's go home, it's freezing. Not long after, another sailor, Guthar Svarvason, also accidentally landed on the island. This place is beautiful, isn't it? I shall name it Gatharshomi, after myself. Alright, let's go home, it's freezing. Finally, a third sailor, Rafna Floki Vilgetherson, sailed to the island on purpose this time. This place is beautiful, isn't it? Huh. There's an awful lot of ice here. And so Iceland was born. News of this land filled with plenty of timber, ivory, and fish spread quickly in Norway. Ingolfr Arnason would set sail to the island in 874. As he neared the island, he threw 2 carved wooden pillars overboard and vowed to settle wherever they washed ashore, seeing it as a blessing from the gods. The pillars landed nearby to the settlement of what would become Reykjavik, meaning Smoky Cove after the geothermal steam rising from the rock. Just as a side note,
That's the best way to pick where you settle. That absolute best. Mad lad.
remember this guy? Well, according to legend, he had a crew member that escaped when Guthar left for Scotland, and some believe that he and his slaves may have in fact become the first permanent settlers of the island. We will probably never know for sure. Ingolfr's settlement was by all evidence a very difficult life. The winters were harsh, livestock kept dying, and his Irish slaves killed his brother, for which he in turn pursued and killed in retribution. Which is, you know, a great start. But other than that, we don't really know much, mostly hearsay and oral stories passed down through the ages. Even the historical chronicle of Iceland was written centuries after the Viking Age, so it's hard to get an accurate picture of these early settlements. What we do know is that the land became periodically settled over a few decades with outlaws, exiles, broke Vikings, and all other manner of marginalized people, mostly from Norway but also elsewhere in Scandinavia. Curiously enough, there's also a lot of genetic evidence that these settlers brought with them captured slave women and concubines, mostly from Scotland and Ireland. Ingolfr's son, Thorstein, began the tradition of meeting together for the Thing, which was a custom of chieftains meeting together and discussing matters in a sort of Viking Age-style democracy. As more and more chieftains arrived to the island, the Thing grew until a National Assembly, or Althing, was established in 930, presided over.
Now, going back to the slavery issue, if you go back to the slavery issue, there's common theories that that's why a lot of Scandinavians are super beautiful, because they would go overseas and raid and take all the pretty and attractive women back to Scandinavia or back to their homeland, and that is a theory why Scandinavia has like a higher tendency to be hyper attractive, because they dragged everyone who was hyper attractive back with them back to Scandinavia. That's a theory. I don't know how accurate that theory is, but that is a theory.
In Scandinavia, which was a custom of chieftains meeting together and discussing matters in a sort of Viking Age-style democracy. As more and more chieftains arrived to the island, the Thing grew until a National Assembly, or Althing, was established in 930, presided over in Scandinavian customary laws by law speakers. This makes the Althing the oldest parliament in the world. From there, Iceland would be home to all sorts of interesting characters. One of these was an extremely volatile Viking named Thorvald Asfaldsson, who was expelled from Norway for murder, whereupon he and his family settled Iceland. The apple, as it seems, doesn't fall far from the tree, as was the case with his son, Eric the Red, who was then himself expelled from Iceland for murder. He used his exile to discover the island of Greenland and settled it permanently in 985. Having a pedigree for discovery at this point, his son, Leif Erikson, would go on to be one of the most famous Icelanders in history, credited for being the first European to discover America. He created a settlement in an area he called Vinland in modern-day Canada, but then
I was wrong. I thought it was the expulsion of the pagans that led to Leif Erikson's thing, but what do I know?
abandoned the village, presumably because, who would want to live in Canada?
True, I understand that. As a Canadian, nobody wants to live out there.
It is around this time that Christianity started to take a hold of Iceland, mostly by pressure from Norway to improve relations for trade. Leif Erikson was even among the first converted, and is also credited with introducing the new religion to Greenland. Although slowly being Christianized, the Icelanders maintained vast amounts of their ancestral pagan customs. They still met at the Althing, they still raided as Vikings for a long time, and they still settled disputes the way Vikings would. They gave birth to a rich literary sector, writing down and preserving the oral accounts in a list of sagas, some of the oldest writings in Old Norse, detailing stories from all over the Scandinavian world, from Russia and England to Denmark and Greenland. It would not be long before Iceland became a bit of an aristocracy with power concentrated in a few prominent families, which sounds awfully familiar. Norway carried favour with one of these families, the Stirlings, who defeated all other clans on the island and brought Iceland under Norwegian suzerainty. But power still largely remained with the Althing and the increasingly prominent clergy, which wasn't an entirely bad thing because Christians love fish, and boy did Iceland have a lot of fish. This would become ever more important as crop yields were very difficult in the extreme climate. By 1380, Iceland became part of the Danish-led coalition of the Kalmar Union, which you'll remember from the episode on Denmark. But the Kalmar Union, as you'll recall, eventually ended up splitting in two, and Iceland remained in the half of Denmark-Norway, where they eventually gave up almost all of their autonomy under King Frederick III, which really sucked when Barbary pirates raided them for slaves in a weird twist of irony. I always thought that slaves came to Iceland, not from Iceland. The union with Denmark also had a couple of other little...
I had no idea Barbary pirates raided Iceland. What the fuck? Why? Why would they ever go up to Iceland?
Side effects. Christian III imposed Lutheranism on his subjects, which started a war with the Catholic bishops who were defeated in 1550, and from then on the Reformation would completely take hold of Iceland. You'll also recall the rivalry that Denmark had had with the Hanseatic League, which really became more of a problem as Icelandic goods increased in demand in Germany and Britain, who were all too happy to trade with another Protestant nation. This led the Danish monarchy to restrict all trade of Iceland to go through Denmark only, in a sort of early mercantilism. For most Icelanders, it was pretty hard living, earning all but meager wages, and most of the wealth generated going to the merchants of Denmark. And what little agriculture they had was almost completely destroyed in an eruption of the Laki volcano, leading to the death of up to a quarter of the population by starvation. At almost every turn, the Icelanders were sandbagged by the Danish government, preventing any growth and prosperity for the people. This extreme famine, as well as the ideas of the European Enlightenment, started making Icelanders call for a change. Those calls got louder at the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars. The 19th century would be Iceland's road to independence. The Danish-Norwegian Empire had allied with Napoleon during the Coalition Wars, and so found itself at the end of a cleaving tool in 1814. Iceland remained part of the Union, but had its Althing suspended, which, as you can imagine, they were not happy about. It would take John Sigurdsson, a self-described history nerd and Icelandic romanticist, to really get the ball rolling on independence, and Home Rule was granted in 1874. But the story doesn't end there, because European monarchies started to get a little concerned about the rampant destruction caused by nationalism in a little event called the First World War. Fine, you're independent, but I still get to be your king. I'll be like the King of England, and you'll be like our Canada. Ugh. Another side note, but 391 Icelanders did actually fight in the war under other nations' flags. Among a few other concessions, the Danes were also in charge of Iceland's defense, which was a little hard for them to do in 1940 when Nazi Germany conquered them in a little under 6 hours. Huh. Great. Iceland was alone. Sven Björnsson set about creating an emergency government and a small coast guard. But completely the opposite of what you may expect, Iceland did end up getting invaded. By the British though, because they felt Iceland was too valuable to be captured by the Germans. Grumble, 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 grumble. British occupation was then handed over to the United States, both occupations revitalizing the Icelandic economy. By some accounts, the nation had a 100% employment rate during the war. Icelandic casualties of the war were limited to a few civilian ships sunk by the Germans. But as the war progressed, the Icelanders had started to get a taste for going it alone, and they liked it. This led the Althing to hold a plebiscite on whether or not to secede from Denmark, which passed by 97%. And so from 1943, Iceland would become a republic, with Björnsson as its president. The Danish king did send a letter of congratulations, so I guess they're cool with it. From there, things were pretty quiet. Even when Iceland did come to the center of the world stage, it was during the Cod Wars, in which the UK and Iceland fought over an expansion of Icelandic fishing rights. The conflict began in 1958 and lasted until 1976, and resulted in an almost unheard of one single casualty, and crucially, an Icelandic victory. Icelandic people are a really hard bunch, enduring living in the very fringes of human habitation, enduring all manner of what Mother Nature has to throw at them. Freezing temperatures and storming seas, active volcanoes, and enough rain to make an Englishman jealous. They provide a glimpse into the Viking past, recording the lives and cultures of a romantic bygone era, being so insulated from the rest of their world by geography and by foreign rulers that it's not surprising how much of an isolated dynamic they developed. Icelandic is even the closest living language to what the Vikings spoke, and with some practice they can even read those old sagas without much difficulty. As an island in the relative middle of nowhere, they have thrived into the modern age, and it's all thanks to that spirit of endurance. And we can learn a thing or two from them, like this series, Life on Fire, which you can watch over at CuriosityStream and its bundle deal with Nebula. Ever since the eruption of this volcano in 2010, scientists have been striving to predict when the next eruption will take place and where, since these Icelandic volcanoes lie right in the middle of one of the busiest shipping and air traffic corridors in the world, and as the world becomes ever more connected, so do these eruptions pose a greater risk to human life and the economy. Studying these volcanoes is absolutely fascinating, and I definitely recommend checking this series out. CuriosityStream has thousands of titles and documentaries covering history, science, nature, and a whole lot more for just $2.99 a month. But if you use my link at curiositystream.com/SUIBHNE, you'll not only get to try CuriosityStream for free, but you'll also get access to Nebula. While CuriosityStream is a great place for high-budget, well-produced documentaries, myself and other educational channels built Nebula as a place where we can try new things, create new series that wouldn't carry the risk of being demonetized by the YouTube algorithm. There's already great series up there, like this one by Real Engineering on the logistics of D-Day, as well as this amazing video by City Beautiful on the planning of ancient Rome. CuriosityStream supports this channel and others like it by making this bundle deal with Nebula, and by signing up, you'll not only be helping us out, but also getting access to some amazing new content. Try out both CuriosityStream and Nebula for free when you head to curiositystream.com/SUIBHNE. In these really difficult times, I just want to say I hope everyone is staying inside and healthy and...
Alright, that was a great video. I really liked that. It definitely skipped over a lot of history, but I suppose if you're going for, like, the broad historical strokes, that's kind of what you have to do. I prefer more in-depth, because that's just me. But that was a very good video. Go subscribe to... Unfortunately, I was hoping he would actually pronounce his goddamn channel so I could then hopefully copy it. But he didn't, so we're just going to have to go with it. Go subscribe to him. Go like the video. Go join the Patreon. Go get CuriosityStream, everything else like that. Go help him out. He deserves all the love, happiness, and everything else in the world. He actually puts a lot of effort into this. So he fucking deserves it. Yeah, that's it for me. If you liked my pretty vague commentary this time, and it wasn't as in depth as I would typically do, but I didn't know much about this particular topic, and he covered a lot in that particular time, so it was hard to push in. If you liked mine, give me a like, give me a sub, call me an idiot in the comments if you want to. That's perfectly fine. Fuck you, Alan, if you're watching this. Alan's a guy from my Discord. Yeah, that's about it for me. All about snappiness and everything else like that. I'll see you in the next one. And if you guys do like my Twitch and everything else like that, streams will come after I'm done with the university. Just give me a week. Bye. Go fuck yourselves.